The doors of the throne room were already closing when I realized what was about to happen. I am Ethan Hart, the only human guard ever accepted into the royal court of the Voss Empire. Most days, my job is simple. I stand near the throne, I watch the crowd, and I make sure nobody gets too close to Queen Silthera without permission. Today was supposed to be one of those simple days. It was not. 7 nobles had requested a private audience with the Queen. Private meetings were normal. Powerful families often wanted to speak with her without the rest of the court listening in. Guards were told to wait outside during these meetings, out of respect for Voss tradition. Every guard except me followed that rule without question. I never followed it blindly. Not because I did not respect Voss customs, but because I had learned something about this empire that most humans never got the chance to learn. Politeness and safety are not the same thing. I stood near the wall, half hidden behind a tall pillar carved with old Voss symbols, and I watched the 7 nobles walk in. They wore long ceremonial robes, the kind worn only during formal court visits. Their steps were smooth, practiced, calm. To anyone else in the room, they looked like important people coming to discuss trade routes or border disputes. But I was not looking at their robes, I was looking at their hands. Voss have 4 fingers on each hand, and when a Voss is relaxed, those fingers curl loosely, almost lazy. When a Voss is nervous, the fingers tighten slightly, barely enough for most eyes to notice. And when a Voss is preparing to attack, the fingers spread wide and still, like a predator getting ready to strike. All 7 of them had their fingers spread wide and still. I had seen that exact motion before, during a border skirmish 2 years ago, right before 3 Voss soldiers tried to ambush a supply convoy I was guarding. I did not forget lessons like that. I could not afford to. The Queen sat on her throne, calm and elegant as always, listening to the lead noble speak about a proposed trade agreement. Her long silver robes caught the light from the tall windows behind her. She had no idea that the polite words coming out of that noble's mouth were nothing but a distraction. I scanned the room quickly. 2 guards stationed outside the main doors, as always. No guards inside, per tradition. 7 nobles, spread out in a wide half-circle around the throne, each one now standing exactly the right distance apart to block any single escape route the Queen might take. This was not a meeting. This was a trap, and it had been planned very carefully. My heart started beating faster, but my face did not change. I had trained myself for years to keep my expression calm no matter what storm was building inside me. Panic helps no one. Calm thinking saves lives. I thought about my options. I could shout a warning right now, alert the outside guards, and hope they reached the doors before the nobles made their move. But shouting would only speed up their plan. 7 attackers moving at once, with no locked doors to slow them down, meant the Queen would be in danger within seconds. The outside guards were fast, but not fast enough to cross that distance before harm could be done. There was another option, a better one, a riskier one, but only for me, not for her. Every throne room in the Voss capital has an emergency lock system, built into the walls near the main entrance. It was designed centuries ago to protect the royal family during uprisings, back when the empire was still young and unstable. Most Voss forgot the system even existed. I did not forget. I had studied every inch of this palace since the day I was hired, because trust is something you earn with knowledge, not with luck. The lock control was hidden behind a small brass panel near the pillar where I stood, close enough for me to reach without drawing attention. If I sealed the room now, no one could get in. No one could get out either, including me. That was the point. If these 7 nobles wanted to hurt the Queen, they would have to do it in a sealed room, alone, with only one other person present, me. Most people would call that a terrible plan. Trapping yourself in a room with 7 trained assassins sounds like the opposite of safety, but I did not see it that way. I saw it as removing every other variable from the equation. No reinforcements could arrive to help them. No one could pull the Queen away while I was distracted. No confusion, no crowd, no chaos outside these walls to worry about. Just 7 attackers, 1 queen, and me. I liked those odds far more than most people would expect. I moved my hand toward the panel slowly, careful not to draw any attention. The lead noble was still speaking, his voice smooth and formal, describing imaginary trade numbers that did not matter to anyone in this room. The queen nodded along, unaware that every second she spent listening was a second closer to danger. My fingers found the panel. I pressed it open without a sound. Inside was a single lever, old but well-maintained, exactly where the ancient blueprints said it would be. I gripped it firmly. Right before I pulled it, I let a small smile cross my face. I could not help it. Some part of me, the part that had spent years training for moments exactly like this one, felt something close to excitement. Not because I wanted a fight, I never wanted that, but because I finally understood something these 7 nobles clearly did not. They had walked into this room thinking they were the hunters. They had no idea they were about to become the trapped ones instead. I pulled the lever. The heavy blast doors at the entrance shifted with a deep mechanical groan, thick metal sliding across stone with a force that shook dust from the old carvings above. The sound echoed through the throne room, loud enough that every single person inside turned toward it at once. The doors sealed shut with a final heavy thunk. Silence followed. Complete silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise. The lead noble stopped speaking mid-sentence. His eyes moved toward the doors, then slowly back toward me. I watched something shift in his expression, confusion at first, quickly followed by understanding. The other 6 nobles turned as well, their calm postures breaking for just a moment as they realized the exits were gone. Queen Silthara rose slightly from her throne, her golden eyes moving between the sealed doors and the 7 nobles now standing in a loose circle around her. She did not fully understand yet what was happening, but she understood enough to know something had changed. I stepped out from behind the pillar, walking calmly toward the center of the room, right into the space between the queen and the nobles who had come to end her life. "I hope none of you were planning on leaving quickly," I said, keeping my voice light, almost casual, though every muscle in my body was ready to move, because that door does not open again until I say so. The lead noble's hand slid slowly toward the hidden weapon beneath his robe. The others followed his lead, their calm masks falling away completely now, that pretending no longer served any purpose. Queen Silthara finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tension filling the room. "Ethan Hart, what have you done?" I did not look away from the 7 nobles as I answered her. "My job, Your Majesty," I said. "Just my job." The smirk on my face did not fade. If anything, it grew slightly wider, because I could see it now in their eyes, that flicker of doubt creeping into 7 confident faces that had walked in here fully expecting an easy, quiet end to a queen's life. They had planned for guards standing outside the doors. They had not planned for one standing inside, wide awake, and already 3 steps ahead of them. The lead noble's fingers finally curled fully around the hidden blade at his side. The others mirrored him, slow and controlled, closing the distance between themselves and the throne, one careful step at a time. I planted my feet, rolled my shoulders back, and let my eyes move across each of them, one at a time, memorizing their positions, their weapons, their weight distribution, everything my training had taught me to notice in moments exactly like this one. 7 against 1, sealed doors. No outside help coming. Somewhere behind me, I heard the queen's breath catch, just slightly, as she finally understood the true size of the danger she was in. I did not turn to reassure her with words. Words would not matter here. Only what happened in the next few minutes would. The lead noble raised his blade, and the room, so recently filled with polite conversation about trade agreements, exploded into complete stillness, the kind that exists only in the single heartbeat right before everything changes. I did not move first. Moving first meant giving away my plan before I needed to. I let the lead noble take one more step, then another, watching how his weight shifted with each motion. Combat is never only about strength. It is about reading a person before they act, understanding their next move before they understand it themselves. The Voss do many things well. They build strong ships. They write beautiful poetry. Their scientists solved problems that took humans centuries to even understand. But combat, real close-range combat between multiple bodies in a small space, was never something their culture valued. Their entire military doctrine is built around distance and numbers. Voss soldiers are trained to overwhelm an enemy from many directions at once, using superior height, longer reach, and coordinated group movement to corner a target and finish things quickly from a safe range. It works extremely well against an enemy who tries to run, or against an enemy who simply stands still and waits to be surrounded. I had no intention of doing either. Humans learned something different a long time ago, back when our conflicts were fought hand-to-hand more often than not. When you cannot outreach your opponent, you get closer, not farther away. When you cannot outnumber your opponent, you make the space around you too small for their numbers to matter. A room full of attackers becomes a disadvantage for them the moment they can no longer swing freely without hitting each other. This throne room, tall and open as it looked, was not nearly as large as it appeared once you accounted for 7 bodies trying to move at once around a single target. I began walking backward, slow and steady, drawing the group away from the throne itself and toward the open space near the center of the room. Queen Silthara stayed seated, gripping the arms of her throne, watching everything unfold with sharp, careful eyes. I did not want her standing yet. Standing meant becoming a second target the nobles might split their attention toward. As long as she stayed where she was, every single one of their eyes remained locked on me. That was exactly what I wanted. "You should know," I said, keeping my tone almost conversational, "that whoever planned this did not think it through very well." The lead noble's eyes narrowed. "You are one man." "I am," I agreed. "And you are 7 people who just locked yourselves in a room with the one man in this entire palace who was actually trained for something like this." I saw a flicker of hesitation pass through 2 of the nobles standing near the back of the group. Good. Hesitation, even a small amount, was worth more to me right now than any weapon I carried. The lead noble did not hesitate. He lunged forward first, blade raised, moving with the practiced confidence of someone who had trained for years in formal Voss combat schools. His attack was fast, direct, and exactly the kind of attack built to work against an opponent standing still in open space. I was not standing still. I stepped to the side at the last possible moment, letting his blade cut through empty air where I had been a heartbeat earlier. Before he could recover his balance, I used his own forward momentum against him, redirecting his arm slightly with careful, controlled pressure, sending him stumbling past me instead of through me. He caught himself quickly, spinning back around, clearly surprised that his first strike had failed so completely. Behind him, the other 6 nobles began closing in from different angles, exactly as their training told them to do. This was the moment their doctrine expected to work. Surround the target, attack from multiple directions at once, overwhelm through numbers. But their doctrine assumed the target would stay in the center, trying uselessly to defend against attacks coming from every side simultaneously. I had no intention of staying in any center. I moved constantly, shifting my position every few seconds, never letting more than 2 attackers reach striking range at the same time. Each time one noble closed in, I made sure another was standing directly behind them, blocking their own allies from attacking freely without risking hitting each other first. It worked exactly as I hoped it would. 2 of the nobles nearly collided, trying to reach me from opposite sides. A third stumbled backward to avoid stepping into the path of a 4th swinging blade. Chaos, small but real, began spreading through their formation. I used that chaos. A shorter noble near my left tried a quick strike aimed low, probably hoping to catch me off guard while my attention seemed focused elsewhere. I caught his wrist before the blade reached me, twisting just enough to force him to drop the weapon without causing lasting harm, then guided his own stumbling weight directly into the noble standing behind him. Both of them went down together in a tangled heap near the base of a stone pillar. Two down, in the sense that they were no longer an immediate threat, though both were very much still conscious and struggling to untangle themselves from each other. I did not stop to admire the outcome. Stopping, even for a heartbeat, is how a fight that is going well suddenly turns against you. I kept my feet moving, kept my eyes scanning the remaining group, refusing to let a small success convince me the danger had shrunk more than it actually had. 5 remained standing, and their confidence had visibly cracked. I noticed something else, too, something small but useful. The 2 nobles who had fallen together near the pillar had knocked over a low decorative bench in their struggle, and the remaining 5 now had to account for that obstacle whenever they tried to circle around me from that side of the room. A tiny thing, barely worth mentioning under normal circumstances, but in a fight like this, every small obstacle mattered. Every extra half-second an attacker spent adjusting their path was a half-second I could use. I began drifting deliberately toward that side of the room, letting the fallen bench and the 2 struggling nobles become part of the terrain working in my favor. The remaining 5, still trying to reorganize themselves into a coordinated formation, found their movements slowed just enough to matter. The lead noble shouted something sharp in the old Voss battle tongue, a command meant to reorganize the group, to force them back into a proper formation instead of scrambling individually. I recognized the words from studying old military records during my training. It was a call to encircle from a wider distance, using their longer reach to keep me from getting close enough to repeat what I had just done. Smart adjustment. If they had started with that formation instead of a tight circle, this fight would already be much harder for me. They spread out wider, blades raised, moving with more caution now, clearly no longer underestimating the single human standing between them and their target. I allowed myself a small breath, using the brief pause to check my own condition. A shallow cut along my forearm from the second noble's fall. Nothing serious, barely worth noticing beyond the mild sting. My balance was still solid. My breathing was still controlled. Good enough. I glanced quickly toward the throne. Queen Silthara had not moved from her seat, though her hands gripped the armrests tightly enough that her knuckles had turned pale beneath her skin. Her eyes, however, were not filled with fear anymore. They were filled with something closer to careful, focused attention, the look of someone recalculating everything they thought they understood about the person standing in front of her. I had no time to think further about what she might be thinking. The 5 remaining nobles began advancing again, more carefully this time, wider apart, forcing me to work harder for every inch of space I controlled. "You fight like a Voss soldier from 3 centuries ago," the lead noble said, circling slowly at the edge of my vision. "Careful, patient. It will not save you." "Maybe not," I said, keeping my stance loose and ready. "But it is working so far, and we are only getting started." He struck again, faster this time, and 2 others moved simultaneously from opposite angles, clearly coordinated, clearly meant to close every gap I might try to use for escape or repositioning. I dropped low instead of moving sideways, letting the first 2 blades pass harmlessly above me, then drove upward into the space between them, using the narrow gap their own formation had accidentally created. My shoulder connected solidly with the ribs of the noble on my right, knocking the air from him and sending him backward into a decorative stone column hard enough to end his part in this fight for good. The lead noble's blade came down toward my exposed back the instant I straightened. I felt the air shift behind me, heard the whistle of metal cutting close, and twisted at the last possible moment, the blade grazing my shoulder instead of finding anything more serious. Pain flared bright and sharp, but I had trained myself long ago not to let pain slow my thinking, only my movement, and even then only slightly. I turned the twist into a full spin, using the momentum to drive my elbow into the lead noble's jaw, with enough force to send him stumbling back several steps, his blade clattering from his grip and skidding across the polished floor. 4 nobles remained fully active now. The 2 fallen ones near the pillar were beginning to stir, struggling to rise, but slowly, clearly still dazed from their earlier fall. I kept moving, refusing to give any of them a stationary target. Every second I stayed unpredictable was a second closer to turning their numbers advantage into a numbers disadvantage. In open space, 7 against 1 favored them completely. In this tightening, chaotic scramble, their numbers were beginning to work against each other instead of against me. One of the remaining 4, a taller noble who had stayed mostly quiet until now, suddenly broke away from the group entirely, moving fast toward the throne itself instead of continuing to focus on me. My chest tightened instantly. This was the moment I had been watching for, the moment I feared most since realizing what this meeting truly was. If even one of them reached the queen directly, the entire careful strategy I had built collapsed in an instant. I could not let that happen. I moved faster than I had allowed myself to move the entire fight so far, cutting across the open floor at an angle designed to intercept him before he closed the remaining distance to the throne. My lungs burned, my shoulder throbbed with every stride, but none of that mattered right now. Queen Silthara finally rose from her seat, backing away instinctively as the tall noble closed in, her earlier stillness breaking into visible alarm for the first time since this entire confrontation began. I reached him 3 steps before he reached her. I caught his outstretched arm before it could reach any closer to the throne, redirecting his entire forward momentum sideways with as much force as I could gather in that single motion. He crashed into the base of a stone statue standing near the throne's edge, the impact hard enough to knock the weapon from his grip and leave him gasping on the floor, stunned but breathing. 3 down now, none of them permanently harmed, but none of them capable of continuing either. 4 remained, including the lead noble, who had recovered from my earlier strike and now stood a short distance away, blade still in hand, jaw already beginning to swell where my elbow had connected. His breathing was heavier now, his earlier confidence replaced with something closer to calculation. He was reassessing me, the same way I had been reassessing all 7 of them since the moment they walked into this room. "You fight better than any human record I have studied," he said, circling carefully, keeping distance between us now instead of closing it recklessly. "Where were you trained?" "Somewhere your empire never bothered looking," I answered honestly. Humanity was still young to the rest of the galaxy, still often underestimated, still treated as a small, fragile species that had gotten lucky more than skilled. Most Voss never studied our history closely enough to understand why that assumption was a mistake. He did not respond to that. Instead, he raised his hand and gave a sharp signal to the remaining 3 nobles still capable of fighting. They spread out again, wider this time, clearly having learned from watching their companions fall one after another. No more rushing forward carelessly. No more predictable, coordinated strikes from obvious angles. This next part would be harder. I kept my breathing steady, ignoring the throbbing ache along my shoulder and the sting from the earlier cut on my forearm. Small wounds, manageable ones. Nothing that would stop me from finishing what I had already started. The 3 remaining attackers began moving in a slow, careful rotation around me, forcing me to keep turning to track all of them at once. This was smarter. Wider spacing meant I could no longer use one attacker's body to block another's attack. If I focused too long on any single direction, the others could close in from the sides I was no longer watching. I needed a new advantage, since my earlier tactics had already been studied and countered. My eyes moved quickly around the throne room, searching for anything useful. A tall decorative lantern stood near the edge of the room, its metal frame old but still solid. A long ceremonial banner hung from the ceiling nearby, heavy fabric secured loosely at its base. And directly above the center of the room, a large crystal chandelier hung from thick chains, its light casting shifting patterns across the polished floor. An idea formed quickly, the kind of plan that only makes sense in the middle of a fight, when there is no time left to consider anything safer. I backed toward the lantern slowly, letting the 3 remaining nobles believe I was simply retreating, buying myself distance rather than planning anything specific. The lead noble's eyes narrowed with suspicion, clearly expecting some kind of trick, but he could not yet see what I intended. When I reached the lantern, I grabbed its base and pulled hard, tearing it free from its mounting, with more strength than its delicate appearance suggested I would need. The three nobles surged forward the instant they saw the opening, believing I had left myself defenseless by focusing on the lantern instead of them. That was exactly the mistake I wanted them to make. I swung the lantern in a wide arc, not aiming to strike any of them directly, but aiming instead for the thick chain holding the chandelier above the center of the room. The impact was solid, metal against metal, sending a sharp vibration through my arms and knocking the chain loose from one of its two anchor points. The chandelier tilted sharply, crystal pieces catching the light in wild, scattering patterns as it swung downward on its remaining chain like a massive pendulum. The three nobles, caught mid-charge directly beneath its new path, had only a heartbeat to react. One managed to dive clear in time, rolling awkwardly across the floor and losing his weapon in the process. The other two were not fast enough, caught by the heavy swinging frame and knocked backward hard enough to end their part in the fight entirely, both crumbling to the floor beside scattered pieces of broken crystal. Only the lead noble remained standing now, along with the one who had managed to dive clear of the falling chandelier. For a moment, neither of them moved. I watched their eyes flick toward the sealed doors, then toward their fallen companions scattered across the floor, then finally back toward me. I recognized that look. It is the same look every trained fighter gets the moment they realize the plan they walked in with no longer applies, and no new plan has yet arrived to replace it. I used that hesitation to my advantage, circling slowly to keep both of them within view at once, refusing to let either one drift toward a blind spot behind me. My shoulder still throbbed from the earlier graze, and my forearm stung with every small movement, but neither injury was severe enough to slow me down in any way that mattered. Pain, I had learned long ago, is simply information. It tells you where you have been hurt. It does not have to tell you how to fight. 2 against 1. The odds had finally shifted enough that I could feel confidence settling into my chest, though I refused to let that confidence make me careless. Careless thinking was how skilled fighters lost fights they should have won. The lead noble stared at the wreckage of the chandelier, then back at me, something between disbelief and grudging respect crossing his features. "You destroyed royal property to win a fight," he said, almost incredulous. "I protected the queen," I corrected. The chandelier was simply in a useful position. The remaining noble beside him, the one who had dove clear earlier, rose slowly to his feet, retrieving a fallen blade from the floor near one of his unconscious companions. His hands trembled slightly, adrenaline and fear finally breaking through whatever calm training had given him before this fight began. I understood that feeling well. It happens to everyone eventually, no matter how much training they carry. The difference between winning and losing often comes down to whether you let that feeling control you, or whether you control it instead. "2 of you left," I said, keeping my tone calm, almost gentle, though my body remained fully alert and ready. "This does not need to end badly for either of you. Surrender now, and you both walk away from this room breathing." The lead noble's expression hardened. "We cannot surrender. Failure means far worse for us than anything you could do in this room." That answer told me everything I needed to know about who had truly organized this attack, and how deep this conspiracy likely reached beyond these 7 individuals. Someone powerful stood behind this plan, someone who had convinced these nobles that failure carried consequences worse than facing me directly. I filed that information away carefully, though there was no time to think further about it now. The lead noble lunged again, faster and more desperate this time, his earlier careful patience replaced by something closer to reckless urgency. Desperation makes fighters unpredictable, sometimes dangerously so, but it also makes them sloppy. I let him close the distance, watching his blade arc toward me with slightly less precision than his earlier strikes had shown. I sidestepped at the final moment, catching his wrist mid-swing and using his own forward momentum to drive him face first into the same stone pillar his companions had collided with earlier. He slumped against the base of it, dazed but conscious, his weapon skittering across the floor out of reach. Only one remained now. The final noble stood frozen for a long moment, staring at his 6 companions scattered across the throne room floor, some unconscious, others simply too dazed or beaten to continue fighting. His hands trembled harder now, the blade shaking visibly in his grip. "What are you?" he asked, his voice quieter than I expected, almost genuinely curious beneath the fear. I straightened slowly, ignoring the ache spreading through my shoulder and forearm, and met his eyes directly. "I told you already," I said. "I am doing my job." He did not lower his weapon, but he also did not advance any closer. Something in his posture had changed entirely, the earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by the simple, honest fear of someone who finally understood exactly how badly this plan had failed. I took one slow step toward him, keeping my hands loose and ready, watching his eyes for any sign of what he might do next. Behind me, I could hear Queen Silthara's quiet breathing, steady now, though I knew she had watched every single moment of what had just happened in this room. "Put the blade down," I said again, my voice calm but firm. "This is the only chance you get." For a long moment, he did not move at all. The room stayed silent except for the faint groan of the damaged chandelier chain still swinging gently overhead, and the distant, muffled sound of guards outside the sealed doors, clearly aware by now that something serious had happened inside, though completely unable to reach us. Then, slowly, the final noble's fingers loosened around his weapon, letting it fall from his grip and clatter softly against the polished stone floor. I exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension finally begin to leave my shoulders, though I did not fully relax. Not yet. Not until every single threat in this room was confirmed harmless. I moved forward carefully, checking each of the fallen nobles one at a time, confirming that none of them carried hidden weapons capable of causing further harm, and confirming that all 7, though injured and defeated, remained alive. I had not come into this fight wanting anyone dead. I had come into it wanting the queen protected, and protecting her did not require ending anyone's life if it could be avoided. Once satisfied that the room held no further danger, I finally turned toward the throne, toward Queen Silthara, who stood watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before in all my time serving in this palace. It was not fear anymore, it was something closer to careful, quiet astonishment. "You knew," she said softly, her golden eyes studying me as though seeing me for the very first time. "Before any of this began, you already knew what they intended." "I suspected," I corrected gently. Their hands gave them away before their words ever did. She stepped down from the throne slowly, moving closer to where I stood among the scattered remains of a plot that had nearly ended her life only minutes earlier. Her earlier composed, distant manner, the kind every Voss ruler maintained carefully in front of others, had cracked slightly, revealing something more genuine underneath. "7 trained assassins," she said, glancing around the room at the fallen nobles, "sealed inside this room with only you standing between them and me. Most would call that plan reckless beyond reason. Most people are not trained the way I was trained," I said simply. "And most people do not understand how much smaller 7 attackers become once they are forced to fight in a space too tight for their own numbers to help them." She studied me a moment longer, something calculating settling behind her golden eyes now, the careful mind of a ruler already working through everything this moment meant, not just for her personal safety, but for how she understood humanity itself. "I clearly misjudged your species," she said quietly. I allowed myself a small, tired smile. "You would not be the first." Outside the sealed doors, I could hear the guards growing louder, pounding against the thick metal now, shouting questions no one inside could clearly answer yet. It would only be a matter of moments before they found a way through, or before I chose to open the doors myself. But for now, in this brief quiet moment between the end of the fight and whatever came next, I simply stood beside the queen I had sworn to protect, surrounded by the wreckage of a plan that had failed completely, and allowed myself to finally breathe. I did not open the doors right away. Something about this entire situation still felt unfinished, and years of training had taught me that assuming a threat is over the moment it looks over is exactly how people get caught off guard a second time. I knelt beside the lead noble, still slumped against the base of the stone pillar, his breathing steady, but his eyes glazed with the after-effects of the fight. Before helping him up, I checked his robes carefully, searching for anything beyond the blade he had already dropped. My fingers found it quickly, tucked into an inner pocket sewn cleverly into the lining of his robe. A small metal disc, smooth and cold, with a single dark button set into its center. I recognized the design immediately from technical briefings I had studied during my earliest days in the palace. A signal device, the kind used to alert a second team waiting somewhere nearby that a mission had either succeeded or failed. My chest tightened. If this noble had managed to press that button before I stopped him, or if pressing it was part of a planned sequence regardless of success, there could be more people involved in this than the 7 currently lying across this throne room floor. Who else knows about this plan? I asked, holding the device where he could see it clearly. He stared at it for a long moment before answering, his earlier defiance completely drained away. "I do not know names," he said quietly, "only that if we failed, someone outside the palace was meant to be informed. I was told nothing more than that." Queen Silthara stepped closer, studying the device with narrowed eyes. "Deliberately kept ignorant," she said, "a common method used by those who plan conspiracies from a distance, ensuring that even if their tools are captured, they cannot reveal much of value." I turned the device over carefully in my hand, examining it further. The button had not been pressed. Whatever signal it was meant to send remained unsent, sealed inside this room, along with everything else that had happened here in the last several minutes. "We keep this," I said, slipping the device into my own pocket rather than leaving it near any of the fallen nobles. "Your guards outside will want to examine it, and whoever built it may be traceable through its components." The queen nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. "This was never simply 7 nobles acting alone," she said. "Someone organized this, someone with access to devices like this one, someone who believed my death would benefit them enough to risk everything on a single attempt." I moved to check the remaining 6 nobles one at a time, searching each of them carefully for anything similar. 2 more devices turned up, identical in design, tucked into hidden pockets much like the first. None of them had been activated. Whatever plan existed beyond this room remained frozen, waiting on a signal that would now never come. "You were thorough," the lead noble said, watching me work with something between exhaustion and reluctant admiration. "Even now, after everything, you are still protecting her." "That is the job," I said simply, though I understood the deeper truth beneath his words. Protecting someone does not end the moment the immediate danger passes. Real protection means considering every possibility, even the ones that seem unlikely, especially when unlikely possibilities have already proven true once already today. Queen Silthara walked slowly toward the sealed doors, resting one hand gently against the cool metal, listening to the muffled voices and pounding still coming from the other side. "They must be terrified," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Unable to see inside, unable to know whether I am alive or already gone." "They will know soon enough," I said, "but not until we understand exactly what we are dealing with in here first." I gathered the 3 signal devices together, along with the 7 fallen blades scattered across the floor, setting them carefully on a small table near the throne where they could be examined properly once outside investigators arrived. Evidence like this mattered. It would matter even more in the days ahead, once the full scope of this conspiracy became clearer. The lead noble watched me work, his expression shifting slowly from defiance to something quieter, more resigned. "What happens to us now?" he asked. I considered the question carefully before answering. It was not entirely my decision to make, though my opinion would likely carry some weight, given everything that had just happened. "That depends on how much you are willing to tell the Queen's investigators," I said honestly. "Cooperation tends to matter, even for people who came into a room intending harm." He said nothing further, simply lowering his eyes to the floor, clearly beginning to understand just how much trouble waited for him beyond these sealed doors. Queen Silthara turned back toward me, her earlier astonishment now settling into something calmer, more thoughtful. "You could have opened these doors the moment the fight ended," she said. "Instead, you searched every single one of them first, found devices none of my other guards would have thought to look for, and secured evidence that may lead us directly to whoever truly organized this attack." "I told you already," I said, allowing a small, tired smile to return to my face. "It is my job to think about what happens after the obvious danger passes, not only during it." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind her golden eyes, a kind of quiet recalculation that I suspected would shape how she viewed not just me, but every human she encountered from this point forward. "I chose to hire a human guard because my advisors believed it would please certain outside allies," she admitted quietly. "I never expected that choice to become the single decision that saved my life." "Most people underestimate what humans are capable of," I said. "It usually works in our favor more than theirs." A faint, genuine smile touched the corner of her mouth, the first true smile I had ever seen from her during my entire time serving in this palace. "I am beginning to understand that," she said. I gathered the last of the evidence, checked the room one final time for anything I might have missed, and finally allowed myself to relax slightly, though not completely. Somewhere beyond these doors, whoever had organized this attack was likely still waiting for a signal that would never arrive. That person, whoever they were, would soon realize their plan had failed entirely, and there was no telling how they might react once that realization set in. But that was a problem for later. Right now, standing in this quiet, damaged throne room beside the ruler I had sworn to protect, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy we had only just begun to understand, I allowed myself one final moment of calm before returning to my feet and walking toward the sealed doors. "Are you ready?" I asked, glancing back toward the queen. She straightened her robes, lifted her chin with the same composed dignity she carried during every formal court appearance, and nodded once. "Open them," she said. I reached for the same panel I had used to seal this room only minutes earlier, my fingers finding the lever without hesitation this time. Whatever waited on the other side of these doors, whatever chaos or relief or fear had built up among the guards and court members outside, I was ready to face it. I pulled the lever. The heavy blast doors slid open with the same deep mechanical groan they had made when sealing shut, metal grinding against stone as light from the outer corridor spilled into the throne room. The moment the gap widened enough, a wave of palace guards surged through, weapons raised, eyes wide with the kind of controlled panic that comes from waiting outside a locked door for far too long without knowing what lay beyond it. Their weapons lowered almost immediately once they took in the scene before them. 7 nobles scattered across the floor, some still dazed, others sitting quietly with their hands resting in their laps, clearly no longer any threat to anyone. A damaged chandelier hanging awkwardly from a single remaining chain, scattered blades and broken crystal catching the light near the center of the room. And standing calmly near the throne, slightly bruised, a shallow cut along one forearm, a faint tear in the shoulder of my uniform where a blade had grazed too close, but otherwise steady on my feet, was me. Beside me, completely unharmed, stood Queen Silthara, her posture as composed and dignified as it had been at the very start of this entire ordeal. The captain of the guard, a tall Voss officer named Doran, pushed through the crowd first, his eyes moving rapidly between the fallen nobles, the damaged chandelier, and finally settling on me with an expression somewhere between disbelief and confusion. "What happened in here?" he asked, his voice carrying through the sudden quiet that had fallen over the room. "An assassination attempt," Queen Silthara answered before I could speak, her voice steady and clear enough to carry to every guard now filling the entrance. "Organized, planned carefully, and stopped entirely by my guard." Doran's eyes widened slightly as he looked at me again, clearly reassessing everything he thought he understood about the quiet human who had spent the last several months standing near pillars and watching crowds without ever drawing much attention to himself. "One human," he said slowly, "against 7 trained attackers. 7 trained attackers who underestimated exactly what they were dealing with," I said, keeping my tone even, though I could not fully hide the faint edge of satisfaction beneath my words. Guards moved quickly through the room after that, securing the fallen nobles, gathering the evidence I had already collected and set aside, and beginning the careful process of understanding exactly what had unfolded behind these sealed doors. I handed over the 3 signal devices personally, explaining what I suspected they meant and why I believed a larger conspiracy likely existed beyond the 7 people currently being escorted from the room. Word spread through the palace faster than I expected. By the time the sun had fully set that evening, every corner of the court seemed to know some version of what had happened. Some versions were accurate. Others grew more exaggerated with each retelling, until stories circulated of a single human guard defeating a dozen attackers using nothing but his bare hands and unmatched skill. I did not bother correcting most of them. Let people believe what helped them sleep easier that night, as long as the truth of what mattered most, that the Queen remained safe, stayed firmly at the center of every version. A few of the younger palace staff began watching me differently after that, lingering near the corridors I walked through, asking quiet, curious questions about human training methods, about how someone could stay calm while surrounded by 7 armed attackers in a room with no way out. I answered what I could, careful not to overstate anything, careful not to turn a serious event into some kind of legend that lost its meaning through exaggeration. The truth was simple enough on its own: preparation, patience, and a willingness to use whatever the room offered had been enough. It did not need embellishment to remain impressive. Other members of the court reacted differently. A handful of older nobles, the kind who had quietly doubted the wisdom of allowing a human into the royal guard from the very beginning, grew noticeably quieter whenever my name came up in conversation. I did not need their approval, only their cooperation, and cooperation was exactly what I received once it became clear how close their queen had come to losing her life that day. I spent the following days answering careful questions from palace investigators, walking them through every detail of what I had noticed before the attack began, what I had done to prepare, and how the fight itself had unfolded from start to finish. They were thorough, professional, and clearly troubled by how close this conspiracy had come to succeeding. The signal devices, it turned out, carried traces of a manufacturing signature linked to a small group of merchants operating quietly near the empire's outer trade routes, merchants with financial ties to several court families who had grown increasingly unhappy with the Queen's recent policies favoring closer relations with humanity. It was not conclusive proof of any single person's involvement, but it was enough to begin a much wider, much deeper investigation into who truly stood behind the attack. Queen Silthara took the news seriously, calling for increased security across the entire palace and ordering a full review of every noble family with any connection to the 7 who had attacked her. It was slow, careful work, the kind that would likely take months before any final answers emerged. But it was work built on solid evidence, evidence that existed only because someone had taken the time to search for it before opening a set of sealed doors. Nearly 2 weeks after the attack, I stood once again in the throne room, though this time under far different circumstances. The chandelier had been repaired, the broken crystal replaced, the scorch marks and scattered damage from that day completely erased, as though nothing unusual had ever happened here at all. Queen Silthara sat on her throne, addressing a smaller gathering of trusted advisors and senior court officials. I stood near my usual position by the pillar, though I noticed something different in how people looked at me now. Guards who once barely acknowledged my presence nodded respectfully as they passed. Nobles who previously treated me as little more than a decorative addition to the palace guard now watched me with careful, measuring eyes, clearly uncertain how to categorize a human who had single-handedly stopped 7 trained assassins inside a sealed room. "Ethan Hart," the Queen said, her voice carrying clearly through the gathered crowd. "Step forward." I did, standing before the throne with the same calm composure I tried to carry into every situation, even ones that made me slightly uncomfortable, like standing at the center of attention in front of an entire room of Voss nobility. "2 weeks ago," she continued, "this guard recognized a threat that every other person in this room, myself included, completely failed to notice. He acted alone, sealed himself inside a room with 7 armed attackers, and ensured that I remained alive to stand here today." A quiet murmur passed through the gathered crowd, some nodding in agreement, others still clearly working through their own feelings about a human accomplishing something most of them assumed only a Voss soldier could manage. "For his actions," she continued, "I am naming Ethan Hart the head of my personal royal guard, effective immediately, with full authority to reorganize palace security however he sees fit." I had not expected that. Head of the personal royal guard was a position typically reserved for senior Voss officers with decades of service behind them, not a human who had only recently joined the palace staff. I kept my expression steady despite the surprise, offering a respectful bow toward the throne. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I said. "I will not disappoint that trust." After the gathering ended and the room slowly emptied, Queen Silthera remained seated, watching me with an expression that had grown increasingly familiar over these past 2 weeks, something thoughtful, curious, and quietly respectful all at once. "You could have simply accepted a smaller reward," she said, once the last of the advisors had left the room. "A promotion within the existing guard structure, perhaps. Instead, I am placing an enormous amount of trust in someone whose species most of my court still barely understands." "You are placing trust in someone who has already proven what he is capable of," I said. "The rest, I intend to prove through the work itself, not through words." She studied me a moment longer, then rose slowly from her throne, walking toward the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens below. "When I first agreed to accept a human guard into my service," she said, "it was a political decision, nothing more. A gesture meant to strengthen ties with your people, something my advisors insisted would please certain outside allies without costing me anything meaningful." "And now?" I asked. She turned back to face me, golden eyes catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Now I understand that decision may have been the single most important one I have made as queen," she said, "not because of politics, because of exactly what happened inside this room 2 weeks ago." I said nothing for a moment, simply absorbing the weight of her words. It was not every day that a species, barely a few centuries into interstellar travel, earned this kind of respect from an empire that had existed for far longer, an empire that had, until recently, viewed humanity as little more than a curious, fragile newcomer to the wider galaxy. "Your species survived and grew through challenges that would have ended most others entirely," she continued. "I studied human history more closely after that day, curious to understand exactly what kind of person you were before you ever arrived in my palace. What I found explained a great deal about what happened in this room. History has a way of shaping people," I said simply. "We learned early that surviving often meant adapting faster than the danger around us. A lesson my empire is only now beginning to fully appreciate," she said. Outside the tall windows, the palace garden stretched wide and green beneath a clear afternoon sky, calm and peaceful in a way that felt almost impossible to reconcile with the chaos that had unfolded inside these very walls only 2 weeks earlier. Somewhere beyond those gardens, investigators continued digging deeper into the conspiracy that had nearly ended the Queen's life, slowly uncovering names, connections, and motives that would likely reshape the political landscape of this empire for years to come. But for now, standing quietly beside a queen who had finally begun to understand exactly what humanity was capable of, I allowed myself a rare moment of simple satisfaction. "There is still much work ahead," Queen Silthara said, glancing toward me once more. "Whoever organized this attack remains free, and likely still believes their plan may yet succeed through other means." Then we will be ready for whatever comes next, I said. That has always been the job. She studied me for a long moment, then allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the kind I had only ever seen from her once before, in the quiet aftermath of that first, chaotic fight inside a sealed throne room. Somehow, she said quietly, I believe you completely. I offered a respectful nod, turned toward the tall windows, and let my eyes drift briefly across the peaceful gardens below, knowing full well that peace like this rarely lasted long in a palace filled with ambition, politics, and hidden dangers still waiting to reveal themselves. But that was fine. I had not taken this position expecting an easy life. I had taken it because someone needed to stand between danger and the people who could not always see it coming themselves. And if there was one thing 7 defeated assassins had proven beyond any doubt, it was simply this. Whatever danger came next for Queen Silthara, whatever hidden conspiracy still waited somewhere in the shadows of this empire, they would have to get through me first. I found myself smiling again, quietly, to myself, as I turned and walked toward the throne room doors, ready for whatever came next.